Lacey C Clark is an expert in solving the communications challenges between younger and older women of color. Her work includes creating the Self-Love Movement and Holiday, the Self-Love Celebration Series for female youth of hip-hop generation, the Sisters Sanctuary Inner BeauTea parties, the workbook and journal, Celebrate Her Now, and the 5-disc audio collection, Healing the Gap. Lacey's clients include individuals, families, not-for-profits, civic organizations, and corporations. Her insights heal wounds and bridge the gap created by our changing culture. She has shared stages and platforms with Jill Scott, Jill Harper, Dr. Sonia Sanchez, Les Brown, and Dr. Robin Smith of the Oprah Winfrey Show. Lacey's approach has been featured in both local and national media. Welcome to Inspired Life Radio, Lacey.
Thank you. Hi, Lisa. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very happy to have you here. I want to jump in and talk about what makes you tick. What inspired you to begin having these very bold and modern conversations about the hip-hop generation, the hip-hop culture, and how these things are impacting girls?
Excellent question. I think the original motivation was my own personal experience. I grew up, I guess, not in the beginning, but kind of like it wasn't even earlier stages, but kind of like in a nice, when hip-hop was really the dominant culture for young people. And I think hip-hop affected me growing up in the inner city just by not really understanding what womanhood was about. I had a lot of cultural support. I had a lot of, parental support, but I really didn't understand clearly what womanhood was. And a lot of my models and my imagery came from television. And in that, in me looking at television, in me looking around the inner city and seeing how television, radio was, kind of a mirror image of what was happening in the inner city and vice versa, it was kind of like, this is what it means to be a woman. And so it was me growing up not really being clear about what healthy womanhood was in a way that I felt good about. And, really saying, there needs to be a space and a voice and a place and a concept that supports these young women in understanding their value beyond their sexuality. Because to me, that was the dominant visual and the dominant, the vocal thing that I heard when I turned on the radio or saw, some of the earlier videos in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm. You brought up several interesting points, and I just wanted to point out that I can definitely relate to that experience of being in that space of, and it's funny because when I reflect on it, I didn't even realize how much hip-hop culture was impacting everything about me. I mean, from the clothes that I wore, the Air Force Ones and baby fat and the cross colors and all, from what I wore to how I talked to what I listened to how I interacted with my friends. I mean, it was amazing how I was completely engulfed in this culture and I was completely unaware, which I think is the scary part about it, is that a lot of our young people are engrossed in this and they're asleep. They're not awake to the fact that they're being impacted by a machine that's much bigger than they are. And I think, when we look at the history of hip-hop culture, from its inception in the South Bronx to, what it was last night on the VMAs, we're seeing that it's become more of a financial machine. It used to be about expression and competition and friendly banter, and now it's turned into dollar signs. And how can we create more shock value, and who can say the most outrageous thing and get the most eyeballs? So, I think that's interesting that, your passion for this was birthed out of your own experience. And I think that a lot of women, particularly those who grew up in the hip-hop generation, can relate to that feeling of identifying with the women on the screen as what a woman was. Because I know in my personal experience, I didn't really have many women who were in between the video model on television or the hypersexualized black woman on the screen and someone like my mother. And, as a teenager, you don't want to be like your mother because that's your mom. You want to be like her. So you look for these other examples of what an empowered woman was. And when I reflect on that at the time, the teen girls were not aspiring to be like Oprah and Tyra and Michelle Obama and some of these women that are now very visible as an example of what can be, and they're kind of representing possibility for this generation. And so that really resonates with me as well, and I think a lot of other women can relate to that. And I think it's also part of the reason that a lot of parents who grew up in the hip-hop generation are now dealing with their tweens and teens listening to this music, are finding themselves between a rock and a hard place because they are passionate about the music, they're passionate about hip-hop culture and what it represents because they grew up in it, and it's such an important part of their identity, and yet they're torn because they recognize that many of these messages are much, much too mature for younger ears, and that the teens listening to this stuff don't understand the implications of it, and that it's intended to be entertainment, but for them it's instructions for life.
Sure.
So I think, I just think that's a really fantastic point. It's something that a lot of people would be dealing with. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing among teen girls? I mean, I think it's funny because sometimes I hear people pontificating about girls and so forth, but they don't have any experience working with them, so they haven't really been in the trenches to see some of the trends and things that are happening, some of the conversations that are happening among them. But I definitely think you have that perspective, and I know I've often, talked to girls and heard some different things that have really opened my eyes to how different the modern teen girl is from even just 10 years ago. It's just amazing how much culture has evolved. So what are some of the things that you're seeing?
It's a lot. I wanted to go back for a second, so I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to bring it forward to the question that you asked just now. I want to bring in another part of the conversation, and I think that one of the things that kind of highlights a little bit more detail of what I do, and I think that the biggest part that I think is important to the work that I do is really incorporating the community and incorporating the mother and the mother, quote unquote, meaning the mother who is the biological mother, the aunt, the cousin, the whoever that model is of womanhood, to really kind of have an active role in the lives of these young women, because I feel like that's the missing link, I feel, that allows media to have such a dominant influence on the culture and the ways and the behaviors of teen girls today. So I wanted to kind of put that in there. And I also wanted to answer your question. And I think, like you said, definitely the times have definitely changed. I think a huge piece that is shaping culture now with a lot of young people, girls and boys, but specifically girls, is the Internet and how easily accessible a group of people can access information and then use that information to be, I don't like to use the word deviant, but to use the word to be off-center, as I would say. So you have, like you talked about this earlier, the concept of sexting. So you have these young women who are, sending nude pictures of themselves to their friends, and then it's going around to several different people at the same time. So not only is the boyfriend seeing it, but like the boyfriend and all his friends are seeing it. And so, you have women who are not really clear, young women who are not really clear about the implications and the ramifications of their behavior patterns through the Internet. You have a lot of these young women who are fighting, this is age old, but the way they are doing it is quite different. Fighting over boys on the Internet, on Facebook, cussing each other out, meeting to have these group fights. So there's so many things that are happening amongst young women, but I think that what makes it makes it more of a culture is that what someone's doing in Chicago can be definitely seen on YouTube now and can be mimicked in Philadelphia, can be mimicked in New York. And so it's becoming this virally spread behavior pattern that's not really healthy for our young women. At the same time, you have parents who are working harder and who are having several jobs, so they're not available to know what their child is sexting or texting or what's on their child's Facebook page. And then Facebook is so clever now, you can kind of maneuver different things, and you can actually control who can see what kind of visuals. So you can literally have a child on Facebook, with scantily clad clothing on or hugged up or sexed up or whatever on Facebook, and the mom has no idea until she gets it virally from someone else. So it's so many different dynamics, and I feel there's great news about that, and then there's not so great news. But what's scary about that for me is that there's a whole life that can be created from about this little girl or this young woman that the adult in her life has nothing about. And that to me, when there's a separation between the model, the mother, quote unquote, again, mother meaning just women in general, and the young woman and her definition of womanhood is coming from her peer group, there's a danger in that, and there is a ignorance about how to navigate a healthy life. So I'm just concerned in that way. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Those are some of the things I spoke about, but there's so much more, but we'll be here all day. So that's briefly it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that analysis, particularly the piece about the internet. And, you know, to take what you said a step further, I think the bigger problem there is that what I've witnessed among parents is they're either overzealous and too strict, or they are completely laissez-faire, hands-off, and not even aware of what's going on. I think there are two elements to that. One is going to be the parent or the mentor, the teacher, the educator, the caregiver, first taking some responsibility. Because, you know, once girls get beyond a certain age, I generally say that threshold is like 15, 16. At that point, they're little adults. They're behaving in many ways like adults. They start to have jobs. They start to have their first relationships. They start to form their adult identity. So many of the things that need to be done to change them, reel them in, discipline them, the threshold has kind of passed at that point. You can empower them. You can attempt to teach them within the context of real-time experiences. But trying to discipline them the way you would a 9-year-old, that's over and done. And so I think a lot of parents are ignorant of what it means for a teenager to be on the internet. They're ignorant of what their teen is seeing online, what their teen is doing online, who their teen is talking to online, and what the nature of those conversations is. And I think the other piece of that is that, I don't know if you've seen this, but I personally have not seen any type of education out there for parents on, you know, their teens engaging online. And, you know, I've seen some cute little blog entries, and I've seen an article, you know, here and there, but nothing that's really comprehensive that kind of meets a parent where they are and goes, okay, look, your daughter or even your son is online, and I would imagine that this is possibly intimidating, maybe even scary, and you don't know what's going on, and you don't even know where to start to look. It's like you don't know what you don't know. There's got to be that piece of the parent taking the responsibility and saying, you know, I'm not on Facebook. I don't know what Facebook is, and not going off of what your coworker said or what you heard Oprah say or whatever. Like really deciding that you are going to educate yourself on what Facebook is. Set up your account, figure it out. It's important. And really going, you know, I'm going to figure out this social networking stuff. I'm going to get on Facebook. I'm going to get on these message boards. I'm going to get on Twitter. I'm going to figure out, I want to know who Justin Bieber is. I need to figure out why everybody's going crazy over Kanye West. I need to know what's going on, because these are the things that your teen is plugged into. And the other piece of that is that we cannot begin to have those conversations with our daughters until we know what it is
what's going on. Right.
Because sometimes, you know, the parent is going, well, just don't get pregnant. Whatever you do, just don't get pregnant.
See, I think what's interesting about that is I agree, and I'm open. Like, we can definitely communicate about creating some programming. But I think that what's interesting about this is that I think another component is the time piece. You know, really, there should be time made for this education. But when you're talking about an overwhelming, and I mean, you may have, and every parent, every woman, every mother is not single, but you still have a lot of responsibilities. Like, you know, well, I'm supposed to also know the culture as well. And so a lot of times women, I know I'm speaking of a specific example I'm thinking of right now, where, you know, the mom is really stretched in a lot of different ways. She's not only, there's not only young women in the household, but there's, you know, she has sons as well. And all of them are online, interesting enough. And she has a Facebook page, but she's not really kind of being active about, you know, checking and seeing what's going on and being involved because her life is so stretched. So I think that's an interesting dynamic to think about when we're talking about the possibility of the education. It's like, well, where do I have time to monitor this stuff? And a lot of them are actually accessing Facebook on their phones. So at one point it might have been the computer where, okay, well, you can't, you can block certain things or what have you. But now if the child has a phone at their fingertips, it's like they can actually access Facebook at all times. And so I'm just saying that proposes an opportunity to just think about the dynamics that are involved when mothers aren't available to be on every move that the young woman makes, because it's like, their lives are overwhelmed. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. And here's where I was going with that point, is the conversation that you're having with the teen. Because I really don't think it's necessary for a parent to have their finger on the pulse of pop culture in order for them to do this. But I think there does have to be a fundamental understanding of what is Twitter, why are people on Twitter, what are people talking about on Twitter, how are the different ways that my teen can be using Twitter to communicate, to share photos, to share personal information, to live stream, basically. Why does my teen have a blog? What is she talking about on her blog? Why does she feel that this is necessary? I think in terms of that education piece, it's not that a parent needs to devote 10 hours a week to knowing all things social media and pop culture. It's that they need to be in the space of saying, I want to have a basic understanding of what these different platforms are. And from there, it's just a matter of sitting down with that teen, not even having a long, the powwow, come to Jesus type conversation, but something simple in the car. Hey, I hear a lot of teens are you on Facebook? Well, yeah, I am. Okay, cool. How do you use Facebook? There's a lot of different ways to use it. I've heard of kids putting naked pictures on there. I've heard of people doing this and this and this. What do you think about that? I think, just being able to intelligently have that dialogue with a girl would put a lot of parents leaps and bounds ahead of where they are now and where a lot of other parents are, because most parents can't. I was talking with the woman who heads up the parenting division for Inspired Girls, and she was saying that very thing, that she happens to have a Facebook page, but that, rather than trying to stay up on every single event that's going on, she's able to have these intelligent, pointed conversations with her daughter about, who is this person and what is this person doing. And her daughter is into Drake, the rapper. So she decided to start listening to Drake just to see, who is this guy and what is he talking about. And this puts her in a position to more intelligently address some of the themes that may be present in Drake's music that are not in alignment with the values that she wants to instill in her teen. So I very much agree with that sentiment, though, because I think that's the problem that most parents are facing, not just when it comes to the Internet and social media, but just any type of parenting, is that they're overwhelmed. They don't have time.
So finish your point. I'm sorry, I didn't want to come in, but I wanted to make
No, I was just going to say they don't even have time for themselves, and many of them feel like, it's all I can do to keep a roof over my kid's head, much less trying to be plugged into all these other things. But I think part of that is kind of a shifting of the paradigm around parenting and being what I call a present parent, because, we're not animals in that your only job is to give them shelter and food. We're human beings. And so I think I definitely understand the dilemma and the rock and the hard place of a lot of parents who don't have help. And it is tough when you're working those two jobs. You're working 50, 60 hours a week, and the kids playing soccer and school and all of these different things. But I think there has to be a shift around how we go about doing this, because it doesn't necessarily have to be time-consuming as much as it has to be intentional.
I hear that. I think that that's excellent. I think that's excellent. I think that that's definitely a step. I think one of the things that I've been seeing, though, is that the basic connection is missing. And if there's not, and I'm not saying that all girls and parents, I feel like from my research and from the work that I've been doing hands-on, a lot of mothers are in oblivion, and it's unfortunate, that they don't know how to connect to, because, again, some of the ways you talked about before, they're coming from a, old school standpoint. You need to do exactly what I tell you to do. And young women are, again, trying to find their voice and navigate their ways to adulthood. And so you find that there's this battle that's happening where a basic conversation like about Facebook, if they can't open up about, why you don't feel like going to school today, like the Facebook conversation is also something that becomes, it's missing the basic connection. So I think the Facebook conversation, from what I've been seeing, it's something that happens when you have a really developed, powerful relationship, assuming that all of us do. And a lot of us, our community, we don't